Welcome back to this session. Today in this session only I will continue to discuss about ethics and corporate social responsibility. All these terms are intertwined, whether it is justice, ethics or CSR, but I will continue to discuss more in detail about ethics. So, today I am going to talk about the situational determinants of ethical behavior. This pertains to that there are certain factors in any organization where it leads to promote unethical behavior, but those situations will only promote existence of ethical behavior at the same time, because whenever some unethical behavior or event spurs in any organization in a particular moment, then that moment calls for the promotion of ethical behavior. So, those situations becomes determinants of fostering and promoting ethical behavior. So, majorly OB scientists have identified three particular forces that exist in any organization based on certain situations. The first is organizational norms that discourage ethical behavior. We have already discussed this term norms that dictate certain patterns of behavior which are acceptable and unacceptable. Sometimes they are written and sometimes they are not written. Written norms are easily understandable, but there are certain norms, certain situations becomes norm, and even though they are not right, they are morally not correct, still they become acceptable. So, the first feature is that certain organizational norms discourage organizational behavior. So, people tend to follow practices that are accepted and recognized by others as appropriate even if these are questionable. As I said that there are certain norms which are very much written and we follow them, but there are certain norms which are unwritten and knowingly and unknowingly also they are not acceptable, but still people within the organizations tend to accept or follow it by considering them that they are unquestionable and they are acceptable. Sometimes people are expected to remain silent about ethically inappropriate behavior they may have witnessed. So, the point is, as I mentioned, that there are certain situations in organizations where people know that the other person has done something unethical, has performed any unethical wrong or morally incorrect behavior, but still it is expected by those people that people should remain silent. Now, when this practice becomes so evident, then in long run it becomes an organizational norm which is actually unethical in nature, that everybody knows in the organization that this is an unethical behavior, but still they will not try to disclose such kind of behaviors. They keep mum, they keep silent, because that becomes a norm, that it is unquestionable and we have no right to question such kind of behaviors. Therefore, this practice of willingly hiding relevant information by being secretive and deceitful is known as stonewalling. That means we know that the other person has done something unethical or has performed unethical behavior, but they are expected to remain silent and they tend to become very secretive and deceitful. Then this kind of norms is known as stonewalling, which occurs when organizations punish individuals who are open and honest and reward those who go along with unethical behavior. So, it is a kind of venting anger on those people who tend to disclose such kind of or whistle blow such kind of unethical behaviors, and they most of the time tend to be punished. They become victim of certain injustice or unfairness, whereas people who engage or accept such unethical behavior, then those people are being rewarded. It is a way to pull down the other person who is very honest. So, this kind of unethical pattern is known as stonewalling. The other is counter norms, which refers to practices that are accepted within an organization, although they are contrary to the prevailing ethical standards of society at large. So, if there is a thin line difference between stonewalling and counter norms. In stonewalling, if you are honest, you try to whistleblow any unethical behavior, then you are being punished, in comparison to the person who is deceitful and secretive and will not try to expose the person who has performed any unethical behavior, rather he is being rewarded. This is stonewalling, whereas counter norms, which is actually against the existing norms or acceptable or unacceptable norms, this refers to practices that are accepted within an organization, although they are contrary to the prevailing ethical standards of society at large. So, people are not performing or not following the norms of the group or the organization, rather they are performing opposite to it, which is generally perceived as unethical. So, counter norms of secrecy and deceitfulness was accepted and supported by the organizations. Also, they are institutionalized and are usually quite unintentional in the pay systems or formal rules of organizations. Now, this can be that maybe people know that this is wrong, but still people accept, they try to be deceitful or secretive, and these kind of counter norms are being performed in a very unintentional manner. For example, some kind of inappropriateness can be perceived in the salary slip of any employee. For example, it is mentioned on this slide that usually quite unintentional in the pay systems or formal rules of organizations, that maybe the person will make minor calculation or misappropriation in the organizational process and that goes unnoticed. This is counter norms. Already it is being highlighted or underlined as an unethical behavior, but still people tend to flow with that. This is something very unintentional, where people do not have any intention to harm the other person, but they tend to engage in, and people are very much secretive about those small counter norms as well. So, these two kind of situation, that is stonewalling and counter norms, these kind of situations or moments that occur in any organization will call for establishing ethical behavior or ethical standards or through code of conduct in order to maintain transparency within organizational process. The other is managerial values that sometimes discourage ethical behavior. What the managers think they do is right, although it is incorrect, but still subordinates tend to consider it right, and they also tend to follow the same kind of behavior. This is about values, what you think is correct, incorrect, good or bad. If the higher authority is performing any misconduct and it is acceptable by the subordinate, then it becomes acceptable norm, although it is unethical in nature. Although most managers are ethical, it is not unusual for them to have developed ways of thinking that lead to unethical actions. Thus, it is important to be aware of these forms of unethical thinking. This is about thinking only. The major ones are bottom line mentality, exploitative mentality and Madison Avenue mentality. It is a specific term given to some kind of unethical behavior. So, bottom line mentality is something that what an individual thinks is important in any organization for himself. For instance, when you talk about bottom line mentality, it is a belief that financial success is the only thing that matters to him, despite the fact that it may cause long term problems for the organization. So, any employee who is just focusing on earning money in the organization by any means, whether it is right or wrong, that is not his concern. The only belief is that he is here only to earn money, then he can engage in some unethical patterns of behavior. So, this kind of tendency is known as bottom line mentality, because it is his belief and he values that belief. The other is exploitative mentality. When any individual employee is only focusing on maintaining or satisfying his own interest, while giving up some cost that the organization has to bear. So, this is the belief that one's own immediate interests are more important than concern for others, and this highly selfish perspective sacrifices concern for others in favor of benefits to one's own immediate interest. So, this is about satisfying their own personal interest at the cost of others' concern, that maybe it can harm the other person, but that is of least importance or concern for them. An individual employee is more focusing on his own success or own personal interest. And the third is Madison Avenue mentality. It is something that we are making the other person understand or perceive any action, decision to be right, although the intention is very much ill. So, this perspective suggests that anything is right if the employees or public can be made to see it right. So, how you present any information or decision in a way that the public or the employees tend to perceive it right, although the intention is absolutely unethical. The idea is that executives may be more concerned about their decisions appear to be right than about their legitimate morality. Maybe the higher authorities are taking the decision for their own interest and it is absolutely unethical and not at all moral, but still they tend to present that action, decision or information in a way that the public or the employees will perceive it to be ethically correct. So, this kind of thinking leads companies to hide their unethical behavior. For example, dumping toxic waste under cover of night or to otherwise justify them as acceptable. So, maybe they are not engaging in sustainable practices in any chemical organization or any chemical unit, and how they tend to dump that toxin waste under cover, and ultimately they will present the same action in a way that it is considered to be or perceived to be ethically correct. So, this is about Madison Avenue mentality. So, ultimately when these three situations are being perceived by any organization, then again this calls for a moment or situation where these kind of behaviors are being controlled by implementing more stringent ethical practices through code of conduct. The third is again, which is something that it is being practiced although unethical, but it becomes an acceptable norm, and maybe the subordinates will tend to perceive it as ethically correct. This is subordinates emulate their managers' unethical behavior. So, what they tend to generate that a particular meaning out of the manager's unethical behavior. Any manager who is performing some unethical behavior, maybe the subordinate or any other manager will consider it as right. That is their interpretation, that what the higher authority or any superordinate is performing is considered to be acceptable, although the essence is that it is completely unethical in nature. So, this states that although very few managers openly promote unethical behavior, they may do so unwittingly with respect to the examples they set for their subordinates. Maybe they are not knowing that what they are performing is unethical, but ultimately they are setting a precedence that this is how it goes, and the subordinates also learn the same pattern. For example, maybe the manager would ask his assistant to type or print his son's homework assignment during her regular working hours. Now, this sends a clear unintentional message that it is acceptable to misuse company resources. Now, ultimately when the manager is asking his assistant to do the task which is satisfying his interest, then maybe the subordinate will also, or the assistant will also have the same interpretation that it is all right to use the company resources for their own personal interest. So, this is again any other situation which when highlighted becomes mandatory for the organizations to implement some ethical principles and behavioral code of conduct in order to minimize such kind of behaviors. Although to a certain extent it is also a fact that it is very difficult to completely erode the unethical patterns of behaviors that exist in organizations, because every employee is a human being at first. They have their own needs, desires, they have their own belief system. So, at the core it becomes difficult, but ultimately when these kind of situations spur in any organization, this creates a call for handling such kind of situations, creating an ethical base. Therefore, despite what you may say publicly about being ethical and efficient, your ethical actions are likely to speak louder than your ethical words. So, as it is acceptable and said that action speaks louder than words, no matter you say that I am honest, I am ethical, I am true to myself and I am true to the organization, but ultimately what you do, that gives a stronger message to the other person, and that too for your ethical or unethical behavior. Right. Now, these are the situational determinants which identify ethical or unethical behavior and how it can be controlled. The next is promoting ethical behavior. What programs any organization are running within their group and organizations, that how to make employees aware, more knowledgeable about ethics in daily life, and how organizations are making efforts while floating some or running some corporate ethic programs. It is a mandate in every organization, otherwise the behavioral aspect of employees remains uncontrollable, but when these programs are being run within organizations, employees become more attuned to modulate or regulate their behavior based on their code of conduct. So, many organizations have formal and systematic programs designed to promote ethics by making people sensitive to potentially unethical behavior and discouraging them from engaging in unethical acts. So, this is the only way that how we can make employees sensitize to understand that what is ethical and unethical. It is only through certain major prominent programs that exist in any organizations where every employee tend to engage in those situations and understand that how unethical behavior have to be highlighted or exposed in organizations. So, typically corporate ethic programs consist of some combination of the following components. The first is code of ethics. We are already aware of this term in our previous sessions. So, this is a document describing what an organization stands for and the general rule of conduct expected of employees. So, it is about daily life behavioral pattern as well, that in daily life also what kind of behavior is acceptable and how the process has to be followed in order to make the whole process transparent. For example, this includes to avoid conflicts of interest and also to avoid satisfying their own personal concern or interest, to be honest and so on. These are the basic code of conducts which are considered as ethical and have to be performed by any employee in day to day work life. They are also highly specific, stating for example the maximum size of gifts that can be accepted. So, it is a very intricate document that describes that what and in how manner that behavior has to be performed in a very sensitive manner. For example, it is not only about avoiding conflict of interest, but also that if any employee is desiring to give some gift to his colleague or co-worker, then what should be the maximum size of the gift. And in the previous session we have already discussed about the Japanese example, that how it is considered as acceptable in Japanese culture about gifting somebody to your co-worker, or maybe in other culture it is considered as bribe. So, if it is about code of ethics, then even a maximum size of gifts that can be accepted is quite documented in code of ethics. So, the vast majority of codes cover all employees from the lowest ranking employee to the people that are at the top. So, it is not only for a specific group of people or employees, it is right from top to bottom or bottom to top, that every employee, because even the CEO or the director of any institute has to be ethical, and that too the lowest rank of employee has to be honest and ethical. So, this code of conduct has to be circulated among every individual worker at every designation, rank, position and status. Some of the common addressed code of ethics are the responsibilities of the employees, for example, to produce high quality goods and services, to adhere to laws and protect the environment. So, these are the behavioral responsibility of any employee that they have to perform, that there should be no compromise in the manufacturing of the products, they have to reach offices very much on time, they have to adhere to the laws. Now, these laws can be legal laws or even the safety laws, and protect the environment. Relationship with people, to treat people with honest and be fair with their treatment, and prohibitions against inappropriate behavior, that is conflict of interest, corruption and fraud, that they should not indulge in any kind of corruption or fraud. Maybe fraud can be any financial or it can be any decisional fraud. So, this is how the code of conducts, when it is documented and it is being distributed among all the employees, it is disseminated among all the employees, then it tends to control the ethical behavior of the employees. Okay. Next is ethics training. Code of ethics are especially effective when they are used in conjunction with the training programs. Now, just providing a handbook of code of ethics will not suffice, because there are certain legal laws and terms that exist in this document, and how those terms have to be explained to each an employee in a very articulate and clear manner. This has to be conjoined with some training programs, where some videotapes, some simulation techniques, role plays are being conducted in order to sensitize or give exposure to the employees to such kind of unethical situations, and how those unethical situations are being handled based on those code of ethics. So, this includes activities ranging from lectures, videotapes and case studies to elaborate more on unethical behaviors, simulations and also using corporate ethics game. So, this is how the code of ethics, which is a document, is being explained to the employees in combination with training programs. Bodies formally responsible for ethics. There are ethics committee, which is a group composed of senior level managers from various organizations and departments who assist in organizations in making ethical decisions by developing and evaluating company wide ethics policy, which is applicable across the organizations spanning the different departments. So, there is a ethics officer who is a high ranking official in the organization, and they provide strategies for ensuring ethical conduct throughout. So, those officers will audit the ethical policies, that to what extent any ethical policy is very much influencing ethical behavior or not, and if any unethical behavior has occurred in the organization, then what corrective action has to be taken in order to regulate that behavior. So, this is the third program, that is bodies formally responsible for ethics. And the last is mechanism for communicating ethical standards. So, how we are going to convey the standards of ethics to the employees? There has to be some process, there has to be some mechanism. So, organizations tend to reinforce a company's ethical expectations for the employees, and for that they promote communication, while growing numbers of companies are putting into place, that is ethics hotlines. So, if any employee who has encountered any unethical situation or have witnessed any person who is performing any unethical behavior, then how to inform the authorities? For that, organizations have ethics hotlines or helplines, which are special telephone lines that employees can call to ask questions about ethical behavior and report any ethical misdeeds that they may have observed. So, that is how we communicate. Definitely no employee is fully aware of ethical policies, but moment to moment when employee perceive or experience such kind of unethicality at workplaces, whom to inform? So, there are hotlines or helplines which are very much readily available to provide all the information and assistance about the corrective action for those employees, and that can be resolved. Apart from this, there is also a mechanism of ethics audit, which is a practice of assessing an organization's ethical practices by actively investigating and documenting incidents of dubious ethical value, discussing them in an open and honest fashion, and developing a concrete plan to avoid such actions in the future. So, the ethics committee, in collaboration with ethics officer, they conduct ethics audit, where they tend to question any particular decision of the organization or the employee's behavior which is unethical, and tend to understand and discuss the whole situation in a very open and honest fashion, and find a concrete corrective action in order to disseminate the message that this should not happen in future. So, this is how these programs, that is mechanism for communicating ethical and standards in terms of hotlines or ethics audit or ethics committee, training or code of ethics, these are the programs, corporate ethics programs, that exist in any organization in order to maintain the effectiveness of the organization. Because when any employee or more than one employee, they are engaging in unethical behavior, they tend to actually make the organizations ineffective in long run. Alright, this is about ethics we have discussed. Now, once that ethical standards have been established, how to move beyond that? How we are going to cooperate or incorporate as well in the organizations and the society, that being right, that rightness has to be expanded not only within organizations, but expand or extend beyond the organizations. So, whatever organization has earned for themselves has to be given back to the society, because we are taking from the society, we are taking something from the environment or nature, and those become the resources for any organization. But once the organization is established, then how the organization makes an effort to give back the same to the society and to the environment. So, in order to understand and maintain that balance and make the whole environment of the organization and the natural environment sustainable and that balance, organizations engage in corporate social responsibility. It is something that any business that only earns money and nothing else is a poor business, because that business does not have the competency, the capability to extend their hands for the betterment of the society or the environment. So, according to Henry Ford, a business that makes nothing but money is a poor kind of business. Although organizations are responsible for obeying the law and answering to yet a higher standard, that is behaving ethically. So, here when I say that how the organizations can give back to the society and to the environment, it is actually about repaying the debt to the environment, because environment has been the major source for the organizations, but how we have to repay to the organization and to the society. So, it is about behaving ethically, that not only we are taking from all the resources, but we are also returning or paying back to those resources. So, many organizations are going beyond ethical responsibilities by taking proactive steps to help society at large by virtue of their philanthropic or charitable contributions. When we talk about society, society is also a resource where people come from the society to join the organizations. We consume natural resources in order to make the organization function. So, how to repay to the organizations? We can only repay through charitable or philanthropic contributions, where we are trying to contribute in our own way to maintain that balance, and we are behaving ethically with the organizations and with the environment. Because even when we are just taking from the society and the environment and not returning, that is also very unethical, because it is only the selfish concern of the organizations. But if we make an effort or contribute to the society and to the environment at large, then we are behaving ethically. So, this ethical behavior in terms of expansion is in form of philanthropic contributions. So, organizations are responsible for 4 types of responsibilities. It is not only that they are just generating revenue and they are creating capital, they have their more responsibilities beyond that, and those responsibilities are economic, legal, ethical and philanthropic responsibilities. How and to what extent we are true and honest to the organization and to the society, to what extent we are economically stable, but how we are using that money for the betterment of the society, how we are performing ethical duties. Here ethical duties means when we are using nature to make our organizations functional based on the natural resources, then how we are repaying to the nature, and certainly philanthropic responsibilities based on donations and charities. So, when we combine these responsibilities, that is economic, legal, ethical and philanthropic responsibilities, they form a pyramid of responsibilities, and this pyramid is known as corporate social responsibilities. We are dealing with every aspect of the society and nature or environment based on the organizations itself, where the organization has reached while using all the human and natural resources, and how we are paying back to them. This we can only repay, any organization can only repay when they have the understanding of their own responsibilities, that is economic, legal, ethical and philanthropic responsibilities. So, this is referred as pyramid of corporate social responsibility. The pyramid of metaphor is used to reflect the fact that the most basic form of responsibility, that is economic responsibility, is at the base of the pyramid. That means, once any organization is economically stable, then only that organization can think of fulfilling other responsibilities, because every responsibility which has to be fulfilled by the organization, that requires finance. So, ultimately when any organization which is financially or economically stable, then that company can attend those responsibilities in a very lucid and honest manner. So, this is a pyramid of corporate social responsibility. The first is financial or the economic responsibilities, where they make profit for the stockholders. First, they are thinking about the employees, about the stockholders, even the stakeholders. Now, once those economic responsibilities are being fulfilled, then only that organization can think of fulfilling the legal responsibilities by following the laws of the society. All the financial laws, all the resourceful laws, that how resources has to be used in order to make the company stable, this entails legal responsibilities. Then comes ethical responsibilities, that taking only decision which is right and good for everyone. No selfish concern is being entertained. And the last is philanthropic responsibility, that is contributing to and helping society at large. So, this is how any organization who is economically stable and sound will extend their efforts in order to fulfill the higher responsibilities, that is legal, ethical and philanthropic responsibility. Now, whatever we have discussed about corporate social responsibility or CSR, it is about the general understanding, but what is the official definition of CSR? So, it describes business practices that adhere to ethical values, comply with legal requirements, demonstrate respect for individuals and promote the betterment of the community at large and the environment. As I am mentioning again and again, society and environment. This is the foremost concern of any organization, that how based on ethical practices and values, society and environment can be more stable and sustainable. So, CSR involves operating business in a manner that meets or exceeds the ethical, legal and public expectations that society has of business. So, whenever any organization is using or consuming these resources of society in form of humans or consuming environmental resources in form of natural resources, then nature and society both also expect something in return. Once this understanding has been established between the organization, society and environment, then it creates a virtuous cycle where the organization will extend their hand in order to repay to the society and environment. This is all about practices or corporate social responsibility. On the other hand, corporate social responsibility is also known as corporate sustainability, sustainable business, corporate conscience, corporate citizenship, conscious capitalism or responsible business. Conscious capitalism, that when the organizations are economically stable, they have generated revenue for themselves. How that revenue or capital that has been generated can be used in a very conscious and ethical manner. So, this is about conscious capitalism. Therefore, organizations that embrace corporate social responsibility are typically organized in a manner that empowers them to be and act in a socially responsible way to have a positive impact on the world. So, it is a form of self-regulation that can be expressed in initiatives or strategies depending on an organization's goals. So, this is about a conscious decision of the organization that how to use the economic resources of the organizations in a very controlled fashion or maybe in a very self-regulated manner in order to contribute to the society and the environment, right. So, this is about corporate social responsibility. We will discuss more in detail about CSR in the next session. Thank you so much.